A grand carriage hurtled through the forest, carrying either an important figure or perhaps someone in desperate flight. Inside, a blonde woman, Araneia, wept tears of frustration, muttering a curse under her breath. Her thoughts simmered with deep-seated resentment, labeling someone a bastard. Meanwhile, at a magnificent event, the imposing Crown Prince Caesar made a dramatic entrance. Whispers trailed him, marveling at his handsome features and the rumored conquest of his inner demons. The prince, ever focused, immediately inquired about his consort's whereabouts. An armored announcer's bellow heralded the imminent arrival of the crown princess, and Caesar's sharp gaze shifted, a flicker of anticipation in his crimson eyes. His mind flashed back to 2 long years of brutal warfare, a fight he had endured for one singular, driving reason: a woman named Araneia. Everything, it seemed, was for her. A radiant blonde, Jonetta, then stepped forward, offering congratulations on his victory. But Caesar cut straight to the chase, his voice low: "Where is my consort?" Jonetta, undeterred, boldly claimed, "Your consort? It's me, Jonetta, right here." Unimpressed, Caesar drew his sword in the palace, stunning the audacious woman. His eyes blazed crimson, fangs bared, as he demanded with chilling intensity, "Where is Araneia?" The scene shifted to Araneia, tears streaming, her earlier despair now given context. She was an outcast, the duke's illegitimate, limping child burdened by servitude. He, too, had been an outcast, the cursed first prince, a pariah in his own palace. The light dragon's curse had twisted the once shining prince into something feared. A limping ducal bastard and a cursed prince, a pair of outcasts bound by fate. Yet, even with their outcast status, Araneia recalled a surprising truth: she had been genuinely happy. In a sun-drenched memory, she and Caesar embraced, a picture of bliss she wished would never end. But fate, or perhaps a greedy desire for eternal joy, intervened. An imperial decree ordered Caesar to war. Araneia, radiant yet fragile, confronted Caesar, her voice trembling. "You're going," her mind screamed. "Why?" Knowing this path likely meant he wouldn't return, desperate, she clung to him, pleading, "Caesar, you'll die if you go, please don't go." Caesar, resolute, gently pulled away, his promise hanging in the air: "I'll come back, I promise." As he departed, Araneia collapsed, her cries echoing his name into the void. She remembered how he once saw her as his only refuge, a stark contrast to his departure. Her bitter thoughts accused him: "But once your curse lifted and you were healed, you left me." For 2 long years, her letters went unanswered, while whispers of Caesar and her half-sister filled the palace. Joanetta's smug voice echoed in Araneia's mind, claiming Caesar's love and Araneia's unsuitability. Araneia wondered if his healed curse had made her a lowly woman, a shameful secret. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her heart, lamenting this cruel twist of fate. Her despair deepened, wishing for a different past, a different outcome. The memory of their happiness shattered her, her regret palpable: she would rather have stayed broken with him. Suddenly, a violent crash erupted. The carriage wheel splintered into pieces, and Araneia was violently thrown inside the lurching carriage as chaos erupted. The driver, alarmed, shouted, "What's going on? An attack?" Wide-eyed and terrified, Araneia questioned who would dare attack as the driver rushed out. Araneia's face was splattered, her wide eyes reflecting the sudden, brutal reality of the attack. Outside, the driver faced a masked assailant. Araneia wondered if they were mere thieves or something far more personal. A sinister, silhouetted woman flashed in her mind: could this be Joanetta's doing, a direct hit on her? Panic gripped Araneia. She gasped, "No, I can't die like this. This can't be her end." A flicker of resolve, perhaps a memory, reminded her, "I have to live. The one who survives is the strong one." With a desperate cry, Araneia was flung from the wrecked carriage, tumbling into the unforgiving forest. Hooded figures gave chase, their leader barking, "Damn it, she's getting away. Catch her." Araneia sprinted for her life, the chilling question echoing: surviving is winning, is that all there is? Glancing back in terror, she pushed onward, every gasp a testament to her will to escape. But as a shadowy hand reached for her, despair whispered, "What can she possibly do in a hopeless situation like this?" Just as despair set in, the thunder of hooves announced an unexpected arrival. A flash of steel and one of Araneia's pursuers was swiftly dispatched by an unseen savior. Araneia, sprawled on the forest floor, looked up, bewildered by the sudden turn of events. She glanced back, utterly confused, muttering a disbelieving "huh?" As the chaos unfolded, an imposing armored boot stepped into view, signaling the arrival of a formidable figure. Araneia stared up in shock as this new, powerful presence loomed over her. Not one to give up, she fumbled for the dagger hidden on her leg, a last resort. With trembling hands but a defiant glare, Araneia brandished her small blade, shouting, "Don't come any closer." Suddenly, the sky itself seemed to crackle with energy, lightning splitting the stormy heavens, rain lashing her face. Araneia peered into the gloom, desperately wondering, who is that? Who could it possibly be? Through the storm, a silhouetted warrior in imposing armor emerged, a strange radiance obscuring his features. Rain plastered strands of dark hair across a face that seemed hauntingly familiar. Araneia's eyes widened in disbelief, a single broken name whispered past her lips, Caesar. And there he was, Caesar himself, his crimson eyes burning through the downpour, fixed solely on her. Utterly bewildered, Araneia choked out, "Why? Why did you come?" His powerful, armored form stood unyielding against the tempest, a silent, formidable presence. A chilling understanding dawned in Araneia's tear-filled gaze as she murmured, "Ah, I see." Her heart sank with a bitter certainty, he was here to watch her final, desperate moments. To the now perfect Caesar, she realized, she must be the only flaw left to erase. The downpour faded, replaced by a memory pulling back to a time 3 years ago. 3 years ago, whispers filled the palace, a bride on a rainy day, destined for tears and a short life with a monstrous prince. The bride, Araneia, gazed out, her fate sealed. The gossip was unsurprising, after all, her groom was none other than the infamous cursed Caesar. Back then, Araneia, scrubbing floors, often pondered her miserable existence. Her half-sister, Jonetta, would sneer, wondering why Araneia was even brought to the ducal household, forced into servitude. Araneia questioned her place while Jonetta and her mother looked on with disdain. A painful memory surfaced, young Araneia, an illegitimate child torn from her birth mother, Anarisa. After years on the streets, her mother, Anarisa, tragically succumbed to the plague, leaving Araneia utterly alone. Within the Duke of Floris's opulent walls, Araneia's status was rock bottom, treated worse than the lowest servant. Her early life was a constant struggle for dignity, her worth was measured as less than the estate's animals, a truly wretched existence. She was unequivocally at the very bottom of the social ladder. Then, one fateful day, the course of her miserable life was about to shift dramatically. Her stepmother in Jonetta delivered shocking news: Araneia was to marry Prince Caesar. The Duchess coldly reminded her that the Floris family had a long, proud tradition of producing empresses, with a chilling, "Now it's your turn." Araneia finally understood her cruel purpose. The reason she, the unwanted thorn, was brought to the mansion became painfully clear: this marriage. Jonetta, the legitimate heir, wasn't chosen. The cursed proposal fell to Araneia, the disposable one. The horrifying truth, her intended was none other than the cursed first Prince Caesar. Caesar, frail since childhood and rarely seen, carried the tragic legacy of his mother's madness and demise. The monstrous prince, a title that clung to Caesar like a shadow. Noble families scrambled, marrying off daughters or adopting decoys to dodge this cursed union. For times the imperial family tried to seal a match, for times they sought a bride, but every attempt at marriage dissolved before it could even begin. The grim truth, every young lady betrothed to him met an untimely, tragic end. Standing before her stepmother in Jonetta, Araneia finally grasped her true, horrifying purpose. "You mean I'm to be the prince's bride?" she stammered, the words catching in her throat. The Duchess smirked. "Yes, street urchin, you should be grateful for such an honor." Though never officially confirmed, whispers blamed the prince's deadly curse for the string of deceased fiancés. An arranged marriage with that cursed prince. Araneia's hand clenched, her fate sealed. To Araneia, this honor was nothing short of a death sentence, plain and simple. The Duchess, however, painted it as a grand opportunity, becoming the empire's most noble woman. Araneia recognized these for what they were: serpentine words dripping with false promise. She looked up at her stepmother and Jonetta, the architects of her grim destiny. They were tempting her with a poisoned chalice, a beautiful cup hiding a fatal draught. The Duchess smirked triumphantly as Araneia, with a heavy heart, uttered, "I'll do it." With a newfound, albeit reluctant, resolve, Araneia declared, "I will marry the first prince." A brief, ironic reversal of status. How could she refuse such a noble position offered on a silver platter of doom? With her stepfamily watching, Araneia acknowledged her grim path forward, a choice made under duress. A single drop of blood sealed the contract, binding her to the cursed prince. Araneia, with a chilling smile, declared her decision to become the prince's consort, owning her fate. She braced herself, fully aware this path might lead to her own destruction. Now a bride-to-be, Araneia waited alone in a sparsely furnished room, the weight of her future pressing down on her. On her wedding day, Araneia knew the reclusive prince wouldn't show, but the reality still stung. To her dismay, even at the altar, a veiled proxy stood in for her absent groom. A bead of sweat betrayed her carefully composed exterior. The isolation was palpable. Her hand clenched, revealing a small, sharp object hidden within her grasp. To her surprise, no one even bothered with a basic security check, leaving her with a secret weapon. Alone in her chamber, Araneia clutched her hidden defense, questioning its grim purpose. Suddenly, a presence. Her eyes darted wide. He's here. The monstrous prince had arrived. Terror flashed across Araneia's face as the reality of her situation crashed down. Not the prince, but a fully armored knight clanked into the room, an ominous herald. The chilling sound of heavy chains dragging across the floor filled the tense silence. Araneia's breath hitched, her mind racing to comprehend the unfolding nightmare. Before her stood not a man, but a cage, wheeled in by more imposing knights. Peering through the bars, she saw him, Prince Caesar, collared and disturbingly still. A knight declared the prince unconscious, sedated for this bizarre bridal chamber meeting. Shackles lay nearby. Araneia stared, utterly bewildered. This was the feared first prince? The knights unceremoniously dumped the unconscious prince onto the bridal bed. "Then I'll take my leave," the knight declared, much to Araneia's disbelief. "Wait, hey!" Araneia shouted, reaching out as the knight began to depart. As the door creaked shut, the knight warned, "The drug will wear off soon. He should wake up shortly." And just like that, Araneia was utterly alone with the sedated, monstrous prince. "What am I supposed to do?" she fretted. Her marriage education definitely skipped this chapter. Staring at the prince's still form, she muttered, cursed or not, her mind reeled. He was first in line for the throne, yet they treated him like a caged animal. A single tear escaped as the horrifying reality of his treatment and her situation sank in. She observed him, thinking, on the surface, he doesn't look any different from a normal person. Araneia stared at the unconscious prince, a mix of pity and fear in her eyes. Suddenly, she recoiled, her hands flying to her mouth in shock. Her eyes widened, a silent question forming, "What is that?" The scene shifted to the window, a subtle change in the atmosphere. Back on the bed, the prince stirred, a gloved hand twitching. The camera focused on the glove, its texture unsettling and strange. The prince's face was shown, a subtle shift in his expression. His eyes snapped open, glowing red, revealing a monstrous transformation. He sat up abruptly, the bed creaking beneath him. Groaning, he clutched his head, clearly disoriented. The prince, still groggy, sat up, the moonlight casting long shadows. Suddenly, an unseen force erupted, sending candelabras crashing to the floor. With a mighty ah, he stumbled to his feet, barefoot amidst the chaos, gasping for breath. Araneia, thrown back by the shockwave, scrambled away on the cold stone floor, her hands flying to her mouth, eyes wide with terror at the display of raw power. A single tear traced a path down her cheek as she witnessed the prince's terrifying transformation. Shattered furniture lay testament to the sheer force unleashed. What is this power, then? Silence. Araneia cautiously peeked, wondering if the drug somehow still held him. Her eyes locked onto something, a horrifying realization dawning in their depths. Looming over her, the prince stood fully awake, his crimson gaze fixed on his new bride. His crimson eyes, devoid of any warmth, pierced through the dim light, promising only doom. Araneia's face contorted in pure, unadulterated terror, the reality of her monstrous groom sinking in. Cruel words echoed in her mind, "You're going to die anyway, so what's the point of this wedding?" She recalled the whispers of her stepfamily, "I heard you're a bastard, abandoned by the Flores family." Then, the memory of a gift, a sheathed dagger, chillingly labeled number 5 by her stepsister. Her stepsister's voice, dripping with malice, had called it a wedding gift. "A thing like you is probably just a bite-sized snack," her stepsister sneered, "so you might as well have that, right?" The memory of her stepsister, a vision in red leaning in with a twisted smile, haunted her. "If it were me," the cruel taunt continued, "I'd rather end it all than face such a grim union." A single tear escaped Araneia's eye in the present, her past despair echoing. "I know it too," her mind echoed with the bitter truth. She was just a pawn, already discarded in their cruel game. She saw only two paths, her own hand or the monstrous prince before her. Her stepsister's venomous words resurfaced, "If it were me, I'd rather kill myself." But Araneia thought, "Jonetta, there's something crucial you've overlooked about me." A flashback revealed her past struggles, underscoring her fierce will. "I've never given up on life. I've always fought to survive." Clutching the dagger, she vowed, "This blade will never be turned against myself." Her resolve crystallized, ultimately, only the stronger one will survive this. Brandishing the dagger, Araneia screamed, her voice trembling, "Stay! Stay away!" Tears streamed down her face as she confronted the terrifying prince. "You!" The prince surprisingly seemed to pause, his crimson eyes questioning. "Stay away!" Araneia, trembling but resolute, repeated her demand, "Yeah, get away!" As the prince loomed, he defied her warning, invading her space with startling speed. Her terror was palpable. His crimson gaze fixed on the dagger she shakily pointed, a silent challenge in his eyes. "What are you doing?" she gasped as he questioned her intent. "Are you really going to stab?" Now face to face, her blade mere inches from him, the tension in the moonlit room thickened. Suddenly, a pained grimace twisted his features, a crack appearing in his monstrous facade. He recoiled, clutching his head with a guttural "ah." His dark power flared. Araneia watched, bewildered. Why is he doing that? This isn't the attack she expected. The prince collapsed, another agonizing cry tearing from him as unseen forces racked his body. Staring at his writhing form, a shocking thought dawned on Araneia, he's terrified. Araneia stared, bewildered, terrified, but of what exactly? A sudden flash illuminated the grand window. Don't tell me, she thought. Her eyes widened as the prince cowered. Could this fearsome creature be afraid of thunder? He flinched violently, hands clamped over his ears, trembling uncontrollably. A single tear escaped his crimson eye as he looked up, a flicker of vulnerability. Araneia watched, a bead of sweat tracing her temple. This was unexpected. The rumored monster shaking like a leaf at a mere clap of thunder. It didn't add up. But she mused, a new thought dawning. If I'm not mistaken, her hand instinctively reached out, a gentle touch towards his trembling form. Looking into his crimson, yet somehow pained, eye, she realized, this man isn't a monster. Araneia, with newfound empathy, murmured, "It's okay. He's just a frightened beast." He looked up, his crimson eyes wide, as she gently explained, "That sound is loud, but it won't hurt us." "We're okay?" "Yeah, it's okay," she insisted, a hopeful thought flashing. "He's responding. If I just keep calming him." She reached out, her delicate hand resting on his arm, a beacon of calm in the stormlit room. But another thunderclap sent him reeling with a guttural scream, shattering the fragile peace. His hand contorted, dark and clawed against a backdrop of raw, chaotic energy as he groaned in agony. "Caesar, just wait, calm down," Araneia pleaded, her voice trembling as he writhed before her. She watched with a mix of fear and concern as guttural growls escaped him, her own dagger lying forgotten nearby. His gaze, and then his hand, drifted towards the fallen dagger, a dangerous glint in the dim light. In a shocking twist, his transformed, clawed hand covered hers, both perilously close to the blade. The prince collapsed onto Araneia, his face a mask of pain, her world thrown off kilter. His monstrous, clawed hand covered hers, a tense moment over the dagger as an unknown energy crackled. A jarring memory surfaced, a stern aide, Mercedes, appearing before a younger, bewildered Araneia. Back in the present, a terrifying close-up revealed the prince's inhumanly sharp, predatory fangs. His transformation escalated, crimson eyes blazed, dark scales crept across his skin, a truly feral visage. Araneia stared aghast as the prince's features warped. His appearance changed. She silently screamed. A potent, unfamiliar sensation coursed through Araneia, her body trembling as she gasped, yet she felt an overwhelming power, as if her very essence was being consumed by his proximity. Her eyes flew open in utter shock as the prince leaned closer, his actions defying all expectation. Instead of a fatal bite, his tongue darted out, he was licking the wound. A bizarre, unsettling intimacy. Araneia was utterly bewildered as the prince tended to her hand in the most unexpected way. A strange heat washed over her as she stammered, "Caesar, just wait, stop." Her mind raced, trying to comprehend this bizarre turn of events, a single bead of sweat betraying her confusion. As he pulled back, she noticed a change. Your appearance?" His crimson eyes met hers. Indeed, a startling realization dawned, he had reverted to a more human form. Araneia observed him now, strangely calm. "He's docile again. Why?" A wild theory formed in her mind as he dabbed at his lips. "Don't tell me after that small taste?" He then gently nuzzled her hand, an almost tender gesture from the once terrifying figure. She stared, a new understanding dawning. "Ha! This is less like a monster and more of an oversized, surprisingly manageable beast," she concluded, the situation shifting entirely. With the prince now peacefully asleep in her lap, the chaotic night took a surprisingly tranquil turn. Araneia marveled at his serene expression. To sleep so soundly after all that chaos, she mused, gently touching his chin. She reflected on his bizarre behavior, admitting, he acted strange, but it didn't feel like he wanted to hurt me. A poignant memory surfaced, a younger, more vulnerable Araneia facing a heavily guarded cage, hinting at a shared plight. Stroking his cheek, she wondered with dawning empathy, could he be trapped, just like I was? The prince murmured softly in his sleep, a picture of innocence that belied his earlier ferocity. A small, almost triumphant smile played on Araneia's lips as she realized the immediate outcome. "Yeah, what truly matters," she thought, relief washing over her, "is that I've survived this encounter." As dawn broke, sunlight streamed through the grand window, signaling the end of a very long night. But the peace was short-lived as a door creaked open and a weary voice sighed, "Not another body to clean up." Two knights entered, one warning the other, "Who knows how wild he'll be this time?" "Brace yourself." One knight, clearly on edge, questioned the sudden silence. "Hey, why all of a sudden?" His confusion turned to shock as he spotted something utterly unexpected, Araneia calmly shushing them with the supposedly monstrous prince sleeping peacefully in her lap. The knight froze mid-step, his world clearly tilted by this baffling scene. But the commotion woke the prince, his crimson eyes snapping open with alarming intensity. He jolted upright, looking disoriented and ready for a fight, while Araneia looked understandably tense. Thinking fast, Araneia threw her arms around him, a desperate shield, pleading, "No, don't do that." The prince froze, fangs bared, a bead of sweat betraying his own surprise at her bold move. He looked back at Araneia, her words echoing, Don't do that," as if processing her command. Araneia, relieved, firmly told the prince, "Yeah, you shouldn't do that." She sat with him, a silent vow forming, "I'll make sure you never get hurt." The prince, now docile, stammered a yeah as she asked if he would behave. The knights were absolutely floored, one gasping, "This can't be happening." One knight, eyes wide with disbelief, started to yell, "Stop it, right?" Before he could act, his superior commanded, "Inform His Majesty the Emperor, at once." Elsewhere, a lace-gloved hand paused by red flowers as its owner heard the news. "What?" A maid reported to a striking red-haired woman, "The first prince and his bride have safely completed their wedding night." "She's merely scratched." The red-haired woman recalled a past incident, a bloodied figure, and asked with cold interest, "She survived?" A dark robe settled as the mysterious woman smirked, "How amusing." In a sun-drenched conservatory, the red-haired woman found the news very amusing. Meet Empress Cornelia, a regal figure whose smile doesn't quite reach her calculating eyes. A lace-gloved hand dismissed the maid, desserts untouched, as schemes began to brew. Her past unfolded. Cornelia, the emperor's longtime mistress, ascended only after the previous empress's demise. Even her son, second Prince Matthias, waited 20 years for official recognition, born outside imperial favor. The maid internally noted Cornelia's sharp sensitivity to illegitimacy, a shadow Araneia also shared. Cornelia's lips curved into a knowing smirk. Now that they're officially wed, what shall we do with the girl? Her decision was swift and pointed: assign her the Jade Peridot Palace. The words "the Jade Peridot Palace" echoed, hinting at a gilded cage or a place of ill repute. With a flicker of understanding, the maid bowed. "Yes, as you command, your majesty." Empress Cornelia, fork poised over a pomegranate, casually asked for the girl's name. Araneia. She viciously stabbed the fruit, remarking how quickly names fade when their owners don't last. Cornelia mused on Araneia's chances, her maid darkly suggesting this newcomer might even usurp her. A perfectly painted smile graced Cornelia's lips, but her eyes held a chilling calculation. "Tell her to have tea with me soon," Cornelia commanded, her invitation dripping with unspoken intent. Meanwhile, a priest was utterly astounded, declaring Araneia's survival nothing short of a miracle. He gushed that the descendants of Florus were truly built different as Araneia listened quietly. Araneia readily admitted even she expected to be a casualty of that chaotic night. Her attention snapped to a maid carrying a basket of linens, stark evidence of the previous night's events. A flashback hit, the prince in his monstrous form, intensely focused on her hand, a moment of strange connection. Araneia acknowledged the undeniable proof of her marriage, thinking, at least this much is settled. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself a sliver of relief: I can be at ease for now. But her momentary peace shattered as she was escorted, looking up with trepidation at her new reality. Before her stood a rather forlorn building, and she wondered, this is the empress's generous gift? A maid offered a flimsy excuse for the sudden arrangements as Araneia took in her new, less than glamorous surroundings. The maid, sensing unspoken disappointment, pointedly asked, "Is the princess consort dissatisfied with her new home?" Araneia paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face as she considered her response. With a surprisingly confident smile, Araneia declared, "No, I like it." She then instructed the maid, "Convey my deepest gratitude to the empress for her consideration." The maid, ever so polite, replied, "Of course. Please rest well." Though her eyes told a different story. The title Princess Consort hung in the air, a label Araneia now carried. Utterly drained, Araneia collapsed onto the bed in her new, less than grand quarters. She let out a weary sigh, the day's whirlwind finally catching up to her. The maid's earlier challenging question about her dissatisfaction still lingered in her thoughts. Araneia internally noted that even the imperial palace served up familiar shades of disdain. Yet, she considered, compared to the nightmare at House Florus, this was almost a relief. A voice from outside interrupted her thoughts. "Princess Consort, I'll assist you with your bath." The ever-present maid entered, bucket in tow, ready to perform her duties. Araneia turned, a brief awe escaping her lips at the maid's sudden appearance. With newfound resolve, she declared, "No, I'll bathe myself. I won't be needing help from now on." The maid, ever so proper, simply replied, "Understood, Princess Consort," before taking her leave. Araneia clenched her jaw, a single tear escaping as she steeled herself for what was to come. Later, Araneia sat alone, barefoot and contemplative, the weight of her new life pressing down. The next morning, a lavish spread was laid out, but Araneia sat at the vast table, a solitary figure. "What about His Highness the Prince?" Araneia inquired, only to be told he would be arriving shortly. The headmaid then dropped a bombshell: "You and His Highness Prince Caesar will be residing together here in Jade Peridot Palace." Araneia mused that even if cursed, Caesar's imperial blood made him her most valuable asset. A clatter announced the prince's arrival, and Araneia, ever the strategist, prepared her welcome. With a bright, almost manic smile, Araneia greeted him, "Prince," but her greeting froze as she saw him, not docile, but bound in heavy chains, a look of pure terror on her face. Prince Caesar was not just chained but muzzled, his eyes wild and teeth bared like a cornered animal. He was forced to his knees by guards, struggling futilely against the heavy chains crisscrossing his body. Araneia cried out in shock, "Good heavens! You can't treat people like this." But a guard warned her back, "He'll bite." The prince strained against his restraints, a guttural sound escaping the cruel muzzle. A horrifying transformation began, his hands turned black and scaly, the curse manifesting even now. A guard brutally shoved him down with a pronged staff, yelling for him to be restrained. Caesar erupted in a desperate struggle, thrashing against the circle of guards and their menacing weapons. His eyes blazed red with fury as the guards shouted, "Hold him down! Don't let him thrash!" Araneia screamed, "Stop it," as a guard physically pulled her away from the violent scene. In a shocking display of defiance, Caesar bit into his own arm, a desperate act against his captors. Caesar groaned, the heavy chains digging cruelly into his skin. He writhed, the metal links a stark symbol of his captivity. Guards swarmed him, their armored bodies a wall of unyielding force. "Restrain him again! Move him quickly," a guard barked, the chains clanking ominously. Araneia watched aghast as the prince was pinned to the ground before her. "How can they do this?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief at the scene. A guard callously advised her, "Don't touch the muzzle or chains if you want to keep your fingers." He then thrust an object into her hand, adding, "Also take this." Araneia stared down at the item, her mind reeling from the morning's brutal welcome. With a curt, "Well then, I'll be going now," the guard departed, leaving Araneia with the chained prince. Araneia stared aghast, the words "my God," barely a whisper as the full horror unfolded. Her gaze fixed on Prince Caesar, muzzled and chained, his eyes screaming. "What on earth is this?" The shock intensified, her hand instinctively clutching her chest as the grim reality sank deeper. "What is all this?" she internally demanded, staring at the utterly degraded prince before her. Kneeling beside the lavish, untouched breakfast, Araneia questioned, "How is anyone supposed to eat in this condition?" Then her eyes landed on the guard's final cruel offering, a plate of raw meat and a pair of tongs. A wave of pure, unadulterated horror washed over Araneia's face at this sickening implication.
The blonde woman stares wide-eyed, her expression a mix of shock and fear. Caesar, a man with dark hair, wears a restrictive muzzle, a red rose placed tantalizingly close to him. The blonde woman lies distraught on the floor, questioning how people can treat Caesar worse than an animal. She is shown in distress on the floor, her hair and face marred by dark streaks, possibly blood or dirt. Her face is contorted in pain, eyes squeezed shut as if enduring an unseen torment. The blonde woman kneels before a pained Caesar, who is chained, calling his name in concern. She declares her intent to release Caesar immediately, only to be sharply interrupted. A knight in armor warns her against touching Caesar's muzzle or chains. The knight emphasizes the danger, stating she risks losing her fingers if she touches them, a suggestion the woman internally rejects. She asserts that no one deserves such treatment, regardless of the warnings. Caesar, still muzzled and chained, lets out a low growl as the woman speaks to him. Caesar strains against his muzzle, attempting to forcefully remove it himself. Grrr. Caesar thrashes as he tries to pull off the muzzle, while the woman desperately reassures him it doesn't hurt, despite her own pained expression. Caesar continues to struggle violently against the muzzle. Caesar finally pulls the muzzle off, glaring intensely at the blonde woman. The blonde woman smiles softly, trying to calm Caesar, saying everything is okay now. Caesar begins to convulse in pain, prompting the blonde woman to question what is happening. Caesar clutches his head, crying out in intense agony as a dark aura begins to surround him. Red energy surges around Caesar's arm as he struggles, hinting at a transformation. Caesar groans, consumed by internal turmoil as chains rattle around him and red energy intensifies. The blonde woman watches Caesar struggle with concern, still facing him. An unseen voice warns again not to touch the muzzle or chains, stating it's for the prince's safety. The blonde woman's face fills with renewed horror and despair at the grim situation. A gloved hand, presumably Caesar's, holds a small, glowing blue vial. The blonde woman's expression shifts to fierce resolve, her eyes wide with a sudden decision. NGH. Caesar clutches his face, a dark, scale-like texture appearing around his eye. The blonde woman trembles with fear, clutching the blue vial, worried for Caesar. The blonde woman's hands hold the blue vial, which shines brightly, along with a pair of small pliers. Caesar's eye is now visibly red, surrounded by black scales, confirming his monstrous transformation. Caesar cries out, clutching his head, as the blonde woman tries to soothe him, repeating that it's okay. Eek! The blonde woman screams in pain, clutching her hands, as red energy surrounds her. The blonde woman sits on the floor, looking up at Caesar, who stands over her, still partially chained. Caesar's eyes glow red, and he snarls, consumed by rage and pain. Ah! The blonde woman lets out a small gasp, deep in thought. The blonde woman reflects, wondering if her actions would make her just like Caesar's tormentors. Caesar lies chained on the floor, surrounded by armored knights, as the blonde woman questions if she'd be any different from those who brutalized him. The blonde woman winces, her hand bleeding from a deep cut. The blonde woman's cut, bleeding hand is shown alongside her determined expression. Caesar holds the blonde woman, who presses her bleeding hand to his face, as if offering comfort or a solution. Caesar touches his blood-stained mouth, narrating that he quickly regained his senses. The blonde woman reflects further on the situation. The blonde woman offers her bleeding hand to Caesar, calling it a gamble worth taking. She offers her bleeding hand to Caesar, asking if he wants it and promising to give it to him. Caesar's face distorts with a growl of pain, contrasted with the blonde woman's worried expression. Caesar shoves the blonde woman away violently, pushing her onto the floor. Caesar's mouth is covered in blood, revealing sharpened fangs, a result of biting the blonde woman's hand. The blonde woman observes Caesar, who is now hunched over, as if recovering or reacting to her blood. HMPH. The blonde woman looks taken aback, surprised by Caesar's reaction. Caesar is shown with more blood on his mouth and pronounced fangs, clearly displaying his transformed state. Caesar kneels before the blonde woman, kissing her bleeding hand as a gesture of acceptance or thanks. Irene questions if Caesar truly calms down from blood, her expression concerned as she calls his name. Caesar, with reddish eyes and blood on his lip, reflects on his cursed state and new blood craving, relieved no one else is present to witness it. Irene reacts to her bleeding hand with distress, then looks thoughtful in a separate panel. Caesar leans in close to Irene, his red eyes intense, causing her to gasp his name in surprise. As a chapter announcement appears, Irene, with blood on her hand, urgently demands that Caesar stop his actions. Irene's eyes are wide with an intense and focused gaze, showing deep concern. Caesar embraces Irene tightly, startling her and causing her to react with a pained expression. Caesar holds Irene close, pressing his face against her as she confusedly asks what he is doing. Red energy intensifies around them as Irene, looking flushed and distraught, asks if he is still thirsty for blood and pleads with him to cease. A close-up reveals Caesar's mouth with sharpened fangs and fresh blood, confirming he has bitten Irene again. Irene's eyes are wide with shock and fear, her hair flying back in a frantic reaction to Caesar's actions. Caesar is shown pressing Irene down, his body over hers as she struggles beneath him. Caesar licks Irene's arm, causing her to cry out in discomfort. The scene shows the lower bodies of Irene and Caesar on the floor, indicating their continued struggle. Caesar lies on top of Irene on the floor, both seeming to have settled after the intense interaction. Irene expresses fear and a sense of unease, pleading for Caesar to stop as he continues to press against her. Caesar continues to hold Irene down, prompting her to issue a desperate plea for him to release her. Caesar lifts his head, appearing disoriented and surprised, questioning Irene's demand to stop. Irene confirms her plea, tears in her eyes, explaining that she might die if he continues to devour her. Caesar looks shocked, repeating Irene's words and questioning if he would eat her. Caesar looks down, distressed and seemingly ashamed, as he processes Irene's fear of dying. Caesar states clearly that he does not want Irene to die, showing remorse and concern. Irene looks at Caesar, affirming she doesn't wish to kill him either, preparing to express her thoughts further. Caesar gently touches Irene's cheek, a moment of tender connection after their intense exchange. Caesar looks up, a somber expression on his face, as he reiterates that he does not want her to die. Irene observes Caesar, wondering if he understands death, but concludes that he genuinely doesn't want her to perish. Caesar gently strokes Irene's hair, confirming her thought that he wishes her no harm. Irene, sitting on the floor beside Caesar, calls his name, initiating a calmer conversation. Irene looks directly at Caesar and reveals her name to be Araneia. Caesar repeats her name, Irene, sounding unfamiliar with it, prompting Irene to clarify that Annalisa used to call her Rin. Caesar struggles with the name, then attempts Rayan. Still trying to grasp it, Caesar smiles warmly and genuinely, calling Irene by the nickname Ren, showing he accepts it. Irene's eyes widen in surprise at Caesar's unexpected, heartfelt smile and use of her nickname. Irene smiles softly back at Caesar, accepting his use of the nickname Ren. Caesar looks at Irene and declares they are married now, a statement that clearly surprises her. A shadowy empress with vibrant red hair is introduced, described as disapproving of both Caesar and Irene. Caesar is shown bound and muzzled, while Irene's thoughts indicate his current suffering no longer matters, as he is now the only one she can rely on. Irene states her allegiance to Caesar, declaring she is on his side, which surprises him and makes him question what she means by side. Irene smiles confidently, affirming that they are on the same side, a declaration of their unified front. Caesar repeats the word side to himself, pondering the significance of Irene's statement. Irene tells Caesar to inform her if anyone attempts to pick on him again. Caesar is shown chained and suffering under the torment of knights, as Irene explains that the knights and old men were being cruel to him. Caesar reacts with a furious glare and red eyes, emphatically denying her statement and clarifying that's not what he meant. Irene observes that Caesar expresses negative emotions very clearly, inferring he has experienced more pain than others. Bad people. A hand, presumably Irene's, is extended, forming a pinky promise gesture. Caesar looks at the pinky, questioning its meaning. Irene's hand is shown linked with Caesar's in a pinky promise as she explains they are making a promise now. Caesar acknowledges the word promise, still looking thoughtful as he engages in the gesture. Irene asks for understanding, her expression gentle and hands clasped. Caesar smiles warmly, confirming he agrees to the promise. Irene closes her eyes, smiling softly with a hint of contentment. Plates are shown with prepared food, indicating a meal is ready or in progress. Caesar attempts to eat with his hand as Irene tells him he needs to use a fork. Irene reaches out with a fork, instructing Caesar to use it properly. Caesar laughs heartily at Irene's playful suggestion he is like a baby bird, prompting her to tell him to feed himself. Irene playfully feeds a chibi Caesar, who eagerly accepts the food. Caesar smiles contentedly, eyes closed, seemingly enjoying the meal. Irene observes Caesar, thinking he seems more like a 5-year-old than a husband. Caesar is startled at the table as a new figure enters the room. An older woman covers her mouth in shock, exclaiming her surprise. The older woman calls out to Prince Caesar as Irene looks on. Caesar looks back, surprised, repeating the name, Meche. Irene wonders if Meche is someone Caesar knows, and directly asks the old woman her identity. The older woman bows respectfully to Irene. Caesar looks concerned as the chapter announcement appears. The older woman introduces herself as Mercedes Arancho, in service to Prince Caesar. Mercedes explains she has served as Caesar's nurse for many years, rushing to their side upon hearing of their move. Irene recognizes Mercedes as the prince's nurse, and a former lady-in-waiting to the late Empress Adelaide. Irene confronts Mercedes, demanding to know why she allowed the knights to torment Caesar without medicine or force. Irene reacts with shocked realization, her eyes wide as she processes her own words. Mercedes apologizes tearfully, expressing her powerlessness. Mercedes explains her lack of strength to stop the Empress, clenching her worn hands in distress. Irene looks distraught, watching Mercedes' pain. Irene reflects that Mercedes' hands are worn from labor, concluding she must have worked to protect Caesar, who is a prince in name only. Mercedes tearfully adds that Caesar never listened to anyone before, even rejecting her care recently. Irene's expression shifts to dawning horror and understanding as she processes Mercedes' words. Irene experiences a sudden, dark flashback. The flashback intensifies, revealing Caesar's fanged mouth and blood, signifying Irene's past traumatic encounter. Irene internally questions how she could ever explain that her blood calmed Caesar, knowing no one would believe such a story. Irene fears being accused of witchcraft if the truth about her blood and Caesar becomes known. The title Witch Trial appears ominously, highlighting Irene's deepest fear. Irene recalls witnessing the public condemnation and downfall of a witch from her past. She remembers the condemned witch instantly losing everything, subjected to public humiliation and torture. A burning skeleton depicts the horrifying end of the witch, slowly burned to death. Mercedes, concerned, asks Irene if she is all right. Irene quickly dismisses her state, resolving to hide the truth at all costs. Grab! A black-gloved hand abruptly grabs Irene's wrist, startling her. Caesar calls Irene by her nickname, Ren, his eyes red. Irene wonders if Caesar sensed her worries, then reassures him that she is fine. Mercedes observes the interaction between Irene and Caesar, looking on with concern. Irene forces a smile, reaffirming she is fine, as Caesar subtly watches her. Irene lies in bed, appearing deep in thought and troubled. Mercedes, off-panel, informs Irene about a tea party with Her Majesty Cornelia tomorrow, which will require extensive preparations. Irene reacts with alarm and dread to the mention of a tea party with Her Majesty. Irene closes her eyes, a single tear escaping, signaling her profound distress. Thump. A hand reaches from under the bed, startling Irene by grabbing her foot. Kia! Irene screams in fright, demanding to know what is touching her. Caesar is revealed on the floor beside her bed, causing Irene to recoil in shock and question his presence. Caesar pulls Irene's foot, laughing mischievously, as he looks up from beneath the bed. Irene recoils in shock, gasping in disbelief at Caesar's unexpected appearance. Irene expresses her dismay, pondering how Caesar infiltrated her room and her inability to make him leave. Irene, still in bed, observes the cold floor and hints that Caesar might be uncomfortable there. Irene reluctantly invites Caesar to join her in bed, to which he eagerly responds with a broad smile. Caesar swiftly gets into bed, settling in beside Irene. Irene hesitantly concedes that sharing the bed is acceptable given their marital status. Irene and Caesar lie peacefully in the large bed, now sharing the space. Irene stirs in her sleep, reaching out and murmuring Caesar's name. Caesar watches Irene, acknowledging the unfamiliar warmth of another person beside him while he sleeps. Irene sleepily invites Caesar to move closer to her. Irene hugs Caesar tightly, suggesting they can sleep soundly by embracing each other. Caesar quietly acknowledges Irene's embrace with a soft affirmation. Irene releases her hold, her exhaustion evident, stating her sleepiness as Caesar gently calls her Ren. Caesar leans down and gently kisses Irene's forehead as she slumbers. A man in a uniform addresses Caesar, expressing surprise that he is alive and not another corpse. A striking red-haired man with a bare chest reclines, musing on the satisfaction of the elder nobles. The title card introduces the confident red-haired man as Matthias de la Rosa, the empire's second prince. Matthias remarks on the true desire for a puppet emperor among certain factions. An illustrative map highlights the three dominant powers: the humans' Asatria Empire, the elves' Beryllium Forest, and the dwarves' Stoican Iron Union. A mysterious hooded figure is shown as it is explained that the other two monarchs prefer an emperor who suits their own interests. The uniformed man inquires about the bride's lineage, and Matthias reveals she is from the House of Flores. Matthias smirks, connecting the House of Flores to dragon hunting, and questioning if their blood suppresses dragon power, then dismissively refers to Caesar as a half-wit. The uniformed man discreetly whispers information to Matthias. Matthias reacts with a brief pause, then calmly acknowledges that Irene is illegitimate, finding it unsurprising. Matthias muses on Irene's heritage, questioning if the descendants of Cosimo are indeed unique. Matthias reflects on Irene's mother, surmising her anger in a past event. Matthias dresses, nonchalantly remarking he avoids watching dying women and would have attended the wedding had he known Irene would survive. Matthias gives a subtle, knowing smirk. A maid kneels in despair, surrounded by shadowy hands, accusing her of touching the prince's valuable possession. The maid weeps profusely, tearfully denying the accusation. Irene jolts awake in bed, her eyes wide with a sense of dread. Irene reflects on her uneasy awakening, feeling as though she had a terrible dream. Irene's face shows lingering distress from her nightmare. Irene observes Caesar sleeping beside her, noting that he appears like a handsome young noble when his eyes are closed. Thump. Irene is startled by a sudden commotion from outside her room. Maids outside Irene's door react with alarm to the noise within the room. A maid with a red gem brooch expresses concern, asking if the princess is coughing. Another maid looks around with a wary expression. Irene stands radiantly at her doorway, facing shadowy figures standing outside. Irene, with a concerned expression, internally questions the identity of the people gathered. The maids in the hallway question the source of the commotion. 3 maids begin to walk away, with one casting a nervous glance back. A light-haired maid gives a wicked, conniving smirk. The smirking maid aggressively accuses Delphina of touching the prince's jewel, grabbing her arm. Other maids join in the accusation, confirming Delphina's guilt and demanding her immediate dismissal. Irene observes the accusations with a stunned expression. Irene's expression darkens with anger as she questions the maid's insolence. Irene points and sternly addresses one of the maids. The addressed maid appears startled and taken aback by Irene's direct question. The maid with the red gem brooch confronts Irene, rudely questioning her status as a lowborn, while headmaid Elda formally introduces herself. Elda explains that maid Sarah witnessed Delphina touching the prince's jewel, prompting their collective report. Irene observes Elda's accusation with a knowing, subtle smirk. Irene internally notes the maid's unsettling, glowing eyes, recognizing their malevolent intent. Irene recalls the maid's past as Duke Gasparo's illegitimate child, born from an affair with a kitchen maid named Annalisa. Irene's thoughts reveal the maid's harsh past, treated worse than other servants as an illegitimate child with no backing. Irene considers the typical maid's path to rise in rank and retire, contrasting it with the maid's exceptional circumstances. Irene reflects that such a future was denied to her, leaving her feeling isolated under spotlights. Irene feels forever shackled by bearing the name Flores, which binds her to her current fate. Irene's internal monologue emphasizes her over a decade of being treated worse than even the household servants. Irene declares that she can see right through the maid's deceitful game, understanding their true intentions. Irene identifies the situation as a form of hazing, involving a prince's jewel that makes it hard to verify if it's truly missing. Irene calls out to Elda, who is visibly startled and responds with a hesitant query. Irene sternly reprimands Elda, accusing her of being incredibly rude, leaving Elda shocked. Elda looks distressed as Irene angrily demands to know where she learned such poor manners, creating a scene before Irene was even awake. Irene's eyes glow with firm resolve as she pointedly reiterates that she is speaking directly to Elda. The 2 other maids stand in stunned silence, speechless after Irene's firm words. Irene smirks, rhetorically asking what a princess consort married to a monster prince, with no backing, possibly has to be afraid of. Irene points directly at Elda, accusing her of disgracing Countess Elvira's good name with her insolence. Elda reacts with wide-eyed shock and confusion, murmuring a disbelieving, "What?" The smirking maid confidently questions what a princess consort married to a monster prince without support could possibly fear. Irene confronts the maid, demanding to know who ordered her assignment, and the maid nervously reveals Countess Elvira's command. The maid with the red gem brooch reacts with stunned disbelief, asking Irene to repeat herself. A foreboding thought lingers. If it's not me, they fear. The maid with the red gem brooch asserts that she must personally report the maid's collective insolence to the Countess. 2 maids look utterly terrified as Irene's anger escalates. The maid with the red gem brooch falls to her knees, grasping Irene's dress and desperately pleading for forgiveness, admitting her foolish error. The maid continues to beg for forgiveness, using words like mistake, fault, and error to express her remorse. Irene reflects on the superstition of a rainy wedding day foretelling many tears, as the maids' faces seem to distort eerily around her. Irene, resolute and stern, declares that she must establish order in the palace, even through petty revenge, to ensure her survival. All the maids collapse to their knees, desperately apologizing and begging for forgiveness from Irene. Irene, turning away, sternly commands the maids to leave without creating further disturbance or disgraceful behavior. Irene's piercing green gaze settles on the red-haired maid, who appears deeply distressed, and the maid with the red gem brooch seems startled. As Irene looks on, someone accuses a maid of touching her jewels. The accusations continue, emphasizing that someone has touched Her Highness's jewels. The accusation is finalized with the dramatic revelation of the culprit's name, Delphina. Delphina weeps profusely, her face streaked with tears of despair. Irene turns her head, a concerned expression on her face as she ponders something. Irene questions if her current reality is merely her imagination, a bead of sweat forming on her temple. Irene looks at the kneeling maids, a thought connecting them to her unsettling dream from yesterday. The previously smirking blonde maid now appears utterly shocked. Irene stands lost in thought, questioning her own sanity. Irene points decisively, ordering a guard to be brought to her immediately. A guard in full armor stands before Irene, acknowledging that he was called. Irene's eye, filled with a subtle intensity, observes the scene. Irene points directly at the maid with the red gem brooch, who responds with a terrified, stuttered, "Why, yes?" Irene pointedly asks the maid what she is concealing in her apron pocket. The maid with the red gem brooch frantically denies having anything in her pocket. Irene calmly orders the guard to search the maid's apron pocket, despite the maid's protests. As the guard restrains her, the maid with the red gem brooch desperately accuses Delphina of stealing the jewels and cries out against her apprehension. Elda looks utterly shocked as the prince's ornate jewel, which Irene exposed, dangles before her. Irene's voice asserts that the maid's collective accusation against Delphina contradicts the jewel being found in Elda's pocket. Elda and the other maids are visibly terrified, Elda attempting to stammer a denial. Irene declares with glowing eyes that theft is a serious crime that demands severe punishment. Irene orders the guards to take all the maids away for questioning, ignoring their desperate pleas for forgiveness. Delphina, the maid who was nearly framed, smiles with heartfelt gratitude. Irene acknowledges she saved Delphina from being dragged away by exposing the frame-up, then calmly dismisses the remaining maid. Thump. Irene sits on her bed, deep in thought after the confrontation, her presence still dominant in the room. Irene internally resolves that her immediate priority is to find trustworthy allies within the palace. Irene's thoughts are interrupted as a voice calls, "Len?" revealed to be Caesar, waking up. Caesar slowly rubs his eyes, adjusting to being awake. Irene smiles, asking Caesar, "You're awake?" Caesar tenderly caresses Irene's face, his eyes still heavy with sleep. Caesar smiles warmly, leaning into Irene's touch with gentle affection. Irene internally comments on Caesar's surprising gentleness. Irene reflects on the many unfair situations Caesar must have endured, noting his past aggressive coping mechanism. Irene cradles Caesar's face, their gazes meeting in a moment of connection. Caesar appears contemplative, pondering Irene's declaration that they are bound by fate. Irene silently reaffirms her resolve to build a circle of trustworthy people for both herself and Caesar. A symbolic image of a powerful woman, possibly the empress, hints at underlying influence. Knock. Mercedes announces her presence, surprising Irene, who then grants her entry. Mercedes notes how close Irene and Caesar appear, as Caesar protectively holds Irene. A promotional message for luacomic.net encourages continued support for translations. Mercedes states she has something important to discuss with both Irene and Caesar. Caesar remains possessive, holding Irene tightly, while Irene looks worriedly at Mercedes. Irene decides it's the perfect opportunity to ask Mercedes about her authority to appoint new servants. Mercedes looks distressed, anticipating a difficult conversation. Mercedes praises Irene for handling the earlier commotion, admitting she was shocked by the maid's unruly behavior. Irene questions if such poor behavior and disrespect towards Caesar are common among the palace servants. Mercedes explains that the maid's insolence stems from the empress's indirect influence. Irene acknowledges the Empress's backing but insists it doesn't excuse the maid's actions. Irene pauses, her expression thoughtful, absorbing Mercedes's words. Irene asks Mercedes for a favor, which Mercedes respectfully grants. Irene tearfully explains her vulnerable situation, having no reliable maid or ally in the palace. Irene asks Mercedes to act as her temporary lady-in-waiting, leaving Mercedes surprised. Mercedes, teary-eyed and touched, gratefully accepts Irene's request. Irene holds Mercedes' hand, both smiling, forging a new bond of trust. A maid, Cornelia, interrupts, informing Irene she needs to prepare for lunch and tea. Irene asks if Caesar will join, but Mercedes reluctantly explains the Empress avoids meeting him directly. Caesar erupts in a furious, "Cornelia!" "No," his eyes glowing red. Cornelia gasps in terror at Caesar's sudden, intimidating outburst. Irene looks at Caesar, nervously asking if he truly believes that. Caesar fiercely rejects the notion, his eyes glowing intensely red, unsettling Irene. Irene wonders if the calming effect of her blood from last night is wearing off, as Caesar kneels and kisses her hand. Caesar tightly embraces Irene, his protective and aggressive side clearly surfacing. A single tear falls from Irene's eye as she silently processes the unsettling moment. Irene internally admits she can't accustom to the frightening look in Caesar's eyes. Caesar's face is shadowed, his red eyes burning with intense emotion. Caesar's single glowing red eye dominates the frame, highlighting his monstrous nature. Irene looks flustered as Caesar nuzzles her neck, and she tells him to stop. Crunch. A close-up shows Irene's hand with fresh blood. Caesar's eyes glow red as he stares intensely, an enraged expression on his face. Irene lies on the bed, her arm bleeding from Caesar's bite, as he remains close. Lick! Caesar gazes at Irene's bleeding hand with a subtle smile, his red eyes glowing. Lick! Caesar licks the blood from Irene's hand, his fangs visible. Drip! Irene's injured hand drips blood onto the floor amidst a warm, ethereal glow. Lick! Caesar embraces Irene tightly, continuing to lick her, as she lets out a soft moan. Irene looks distressed, wondering if she should continue to allow Caesar's actions. Irene lies in the opulent bed, internally hoping to avoid drawing resentment or standing out. Irene brushes her hair, contemplating that she is likely already resented and shouldn't draw more attention, realizing the deeper issue at hand. Cornelia asks if she should help Irene with her gloves, but Irene declines, requesting them simply be handed over. Irene puts on a glove to cover her injured hand, thinking that while the injury is known, using it as an excuse for trouble would be problematic. Slide. Cornelia accepts Irene's request, as Irene finishes preparing. Irene stands elegantly in her blue dress and gloves, looking poised. Thump. Caesar suddenly sits up in bed, loudly protesting Irene's impending departure. Irene looks at Caesar with concern, stating she cannot do anything about the situation. Caesar stubbornly refuses, his red eyes burning with intensity. Mercedes intervenes, explaining to Caesar that his behavior is putting Irene in a difficult position. Mercedes reassures Caesar she will stay with him until Irene returns, gently asking him to release her for now. Irene smiles, promising to return quickly as she prepares to leave. Caesar remains fixated on Irene, muttering his quiet refusal. Flash. A grand greenhouse is bathed in sunlight, the scene hinting at a new destination for the princess. Stumble. Irene falters, her body betraying her with pain. Irene struggles to walk, clutching her long dress as she limps along, with a painful expression. Irene realizes with dismay that she was intentionally sent to this far location, knowing she couldn't walk properly. Irene looks up at the distant greenhouse, understanding she was sent to the one furthest from the Malachite Palace, surrounded by the maids. Drag. Irene continues to limp painfully toward the group of guards in the greenhouse. PFT. A male guard smirks, seemingly amused by Irene's struggle. Irene thinks to herself that they must have been aware of her inability to walk properly when they sent her to this location. The official website for ongoing translations is displayed, encouraging reader support. Irene stands in the greenhouse, her face contorted in a mix of pain and frustration. Smirk. The Empress's lips curl into a subtle, knowing smile. The Empress sits regally at a grand table in the sunlit greenhouse, surrounded by exquisite decor. The Empress's sharp gaze is contrasted with Irene's pained and weary expression, highlighting their power dynamic. Irene formally kneels and bows to the Empress, delivering a traditional greeting. A close-up emphasizes the Empress's piercing blue eye and long, red hair, exuding her powerful presence. Irene remains on her knees before the Empress in the expansive greenhouse, surrounded by attending maids. Drip. Liquid falls from Irene's leg to the floor, indicating a fresh wound. Tremble. Irene clutches her leg, her face contorted in pain as she focuses on her injury. The Empress speaks, referencing the radiance of the Holy Cross. Irene turns, her gaze directed towards the distant Empress, feeling the weight of the moment. Stumble. Irene falters again, her dress swaying as she looks surprised. Clutch. Irene clutches her dress, a shimmering light emanating around her. Mercedes embraces Irene, showing concern and addressing her as Your Highness the Princess Consort. The Empress watches from a distance, her expression shadowed and unreadable. Whisper. Irene, looking emotional, expresses her gratitude to Mercedes. Mercedes looks down, her face obscured by shadow, appearing burdened or upset. Mercedes leads the way, inviting Irene to follow her toward the Empress. The Empress sits elegantly in a grand greenhouse filled with lush red roses, attended by maids. A close-up highlights the Empress's captivating red hair and piercing blue eyes as a parrot rests on her shoulder. The Empress gazes calmly as her parrot companion fluffs its feathers on her hand. Irene sits opposite the Empress at the opulent table, appearing somber amidst the bright greenhouse. Irene looks distressed with a tear in her eye, hesitantly attempting to speak. The Empress, with a sharp glance, prompts Irene to reveal what she needs to say. Irene expresses urgent concern regarding the first prince, while the Empress maintains a composed demeanor, inviting her to continue. Irene reveals to the Empress that people are actively harming Prince Caesar. Irene states that Prince Caesar's body is covered in wounds, as a blue butterfly flutters nearby. Irene describes how chains and a muzzle are used to restrain Prince Caesar, and the Empress's hand twitches slightly in response. A maid dutifully feeds the Empress a delicate morsel. Irene coughs, looking uneasy, as if struggling to continue her plea. The Empress coldly demands to know what Irene expects her to do about the situation. Irene appears shocked and asks for clarification, unable to believe what she just heard. The Empress's finger taps a pipe as she pointedly asks if Irene did not hear her question. Irene looks flustered and attempts to counter the Empress's dismissive remarks. Irene continues to struggle, her expression reflecting deep unease and an inability to form a full retort. The Empress firmly states that a person should only be treated as such if they truly act like one. The Empress challenges Irene, asking her to define what truly makes someone a person, leaving Irene stunned. The parrot dramatically squawks, mimicking the word person. The Empress smiles subtly, reinforcing her point that true personhood requires appropriate behavior. The Empress challenges Irene to recall if Prince Caesar has ever exhibited the behavior of a person. The Empress illustrates her point by showing her parrot walking on 2 feet, suggesting a person should do the same. The parrot demonstrates using a tool, further emphasizing the Empress's definition of a person. The parrot squawks while the Empress gestures, implying that a person should be able to speak human language. The parrot speaks human phrases, surprising Irene with its imitation. The Empress challenges Irene to differentiate between the first prince and her trained parrot. The parrot squawks loudly in distress as the Empress holds it. Irene covers her mouth in shock as dark feathers float around the distressed parrot. The Empress, with a cold smirk, declares that her bird is in some ways superior to the first prince. A single feather drifts from the parrot as the Empress's hand extends. The parrot flies freely within the grand greenhouse, now released. The parrot looks back as the Empress contemplates Prince Caesar's nature. The Empress firmly states that Prince Caesar is an uncontrollable beast, implying he must be brought under control. Irene recoils in horror as the Empress suggests that a whip is the natural tool to control such a wild creature. The Empress coolly asks how else one would manage such an unruly being. Irene tries to object, attempting to defend Prince Caesar, but her words trail off. The Empress cruelly asserts that striking a disobedient beast is entirely natural, as a shadowy image of a wounded and chained Caesar is shown. Irene, in a burst of defiance, shouts that Prince Caesar is not a beast. The Empress reacts with a sharp, surprised glare at Irene's outburst, while Irene appears shocked by her own defiance. The scene transitions, suggesting a moment of reflection after the dramatic confrontation. The Empress continues to stare intently at Irene, her expression unreadable following Irene's bold statement. Irene's face is shadowed, her expression thoughtful and pensive after her surprising outburst. A subtle, knowing smirk plays on the Empress's lips. The Empress bursts into mocking laughter, finding Irene's statement amusing. The Empress sarcastically praises Irene's comedic talent, calling her statement the best joke she has heard all year. Irene remains silent, her face impassive and unreadable, as she processes the Empress's mockery. Irene turns towards the Empress, acknowledging her past words. Irene states that Prince Caesar is different from others, her face cast in shadow. A flashback reveals Prince Caesar losing control and violently lashing out when exposed to human blood. Prince Caesar's left hand is shown transformed like a reptile's amidst a splash of blood, along with his intense, beast-like eyes, revealing his dangerous duality. Irene stands with her back to the viewer, lost in thought as the narration describes the sight of Prince Caesar's transformation as a curse. A close-up on Irene's head, with a hesitant speech bubble, signaling her inner struggle to counter the negative perception of Prince Caesar. An abstract panel emphasizes Prince Caesar's gentle smile and calm eyes, highlighting the contrasting human aspects of his nature. Irene stands resolute, declaring with conviction that Prince Caesar is undoubtedly a person, defying the Empress's harsh judgment. The Empress, with a subtle smirk, remarks on Irene's admirable concern for her husband, though her tone suggests veiled condescension. The Empress cruelly asserts that a low-born child like Irene should cling tightly to even a half-wit husband, shocking Irene with her disdainful words. Irene appears stunned, her internal monologue questioning the Empress's shocking statement as faint chains symbolizing Prince Caesar's plight appear in the background. The Empress calmly smokes, her thoughts revealing she perceives Irene in the same low regard she expects in return. Irene's internal despair surfaces as she wonders how to persuade someone who doesn't even view her as human. Irene's hand clenches, a determined clench sound accompanying her internal struggle as she wonders how to proceed. Irene poses a challenge to the Empress, asking if she would acknowledge Prince Caesar as human if he behaved like one, as the Empress's hand taps her pipe. Irene, despite her distress, bravely agrees to the challenge, asking if Prince Caesar walking on two legs, using tools and speaking, would be sufficient to prove his personhood. The Empress, with a mocking smirk, challenges Irene, questioning if she truly believes she can tame that beast. Irene's tear-filled eye contrasts with the Empress's cold, unreadable expression, leaving a moment of tense silence between them. The Empress finds Irene's proposition amusing, but accepts the challenge, promising to acknowledge Prince Caesar if Irene succeeds in proving his humanity. Irene looks surprised as the Empress reveals an additional incentive, passing on the Azure Flames Dream to Irene. The Azure Flames Dream necklace is showcased, described as a precious heirloom passed down through the imperial women since the empire's founding. Irene's tearful eye reflects her dawning realization of the necklace's significance and what inheriting it could mean for her and Prince Caesar. The Empress explains that Irene publicly wearing the Azure Flames Dream would signify the Empress's full support, causing Irene to flinch. The Empress clarifies that this public recognition would not only acknowledge the first prince as human, but also establish him as the strongest contender for the throne, backed by the imperial family. The Empress intimately touches Irene's face, asserting that this level of recognition should be more than enough for Irene. The Empress sets a deadline for Irene, the summer banquet 3 months away, declaring it the ideal setting to publicly present her human Prince Caesar. The Empress, with a severe expression, warns Irene that she despises liars. The Empress, with a chilling smirk, states that as Irene's elder, she will punish her. Irene stumbles, a stumble sound effect accompanying her, as maids escort her through a grand hall, likely after her confrontation with the Empress. A maid looks at Irene with concern, while Irene's face remains hidden, reflecting her deep dismay from the Empress's harsh words. A red-haired man, Prince Matthias, stands amidst red roses, remarking that he expected the woman who tamed that lunatic to be a brawny warrior. Prince Matthias, with a dismissive smirk, notes that Irene is more ordinary than I expected, as a stomp sound suggests his approach. A large black boot stomps forward, nearing Irene and the maid, emphasizing Prince Matthias's imposing presence. Prince Matthias addresses Irene by name, surprising her, who questions his recognition. Irene gasps, eyes wide in shock, as she recognizes the red-haired man's face. Prince Matthias, with a smirk, questions if Irene is returning from meeting your mother, revealing his connection to the Empress and his identity. Irene lowers her head, acknowledging Prince Matthias as the second prince and formally greeting him. Prince Matthias leans in close to Irene, telling her not to be so tense, his proximity making Irene uncomfortable. Irene internally notes Prince Matthias's mannerisms are strikingly similar to the Empress's, then sharply tells him he has no permission to use her name. Prince Matthias laughs mockingly and suggests calling Irene sister-in-law, instead, his suggestion laced with impudence. Prince Matthias leans in, his intense gaze fixed on Irene as he provocatively asks, Irene looks utterly shocked and distressed, her eyes wide with a terrified gasp at Prince Matthias's audacious behavior. Prince Matthias announces his departure, but Irene urgently calls out to him. Irene grabs Prince Matthias's arm, stopping him with a firm thump. Prince Matthias violently pulls his arm away, causing Irene to stumble and cry out in surprise. Irene falls to her knees, looking distraught and humiliated, likely from the forceful push. Prince Matthias looks down at Irene, asking with a cruel tone what she is doing. Prince Matthias unexpectedly catches Irene, cradling her as he tells her she should be careful, a chilling shift in his demeanor. Irene struggles fiercely within Prince Matthias's embrace, repeatedly demanding he let her go, her fear palpable. Prince Matthias whispers to Irene that his actions are driven by, quote, just a pure curiosity, his words unsettling her. Prince Matthias holds Irene tightly, his face close to hers, maintaining his chilling, curious gaze. Prince Matthias smiles predatorily as he leans in even closer to Irene, an unsettling glint in his eyes. Irene looks horrified, her face pale as she gasps and questions Prince Matthias's actions. Prince Matthias remarks on Irene's difficulty walking, addressing her with condescending familiarity as sister-in-law. Prince Matthias, with a smirk, turns away and orders a litter to be brought for Irene. Irene is visibly distressed and embarrassed by Prince Matthias's words and actions. Prince Matthias leans in, mockingly questioning if Prince Caesar even knows how to be intimate. Irene clenches her jaw, internally cursing Prince Matthias as a filthy bastard. Irene is overwhelmed, thinking she has never endured such vile words or humiliation. Irene is on the floor, tearfully calling out a name, Ren. Irene looks up, surprised and confused, questioning if Prince Caesar is there. Irene is startled, realizing Prince Caesar is in the room, despite her being alone when she entered. Prince Caesar is sitting disheveled on the floor, grinning as Irene exclaims about his messy attire. Irene questions if Prince Caesar was under the bed the whole time, and how he got in there, as he gestures for her to come closer. Irene points out that Prince Caesar is covered in dust, noting that the room seems only partially cleaned, while he grunts in response. In a chibi panel, Irene tries to dust off a chibi Prince Caesar, who pulls away with a confused look. Irene smiles, seemingly amused despite the situation. Prince Caesar looks confused as Irene begins to laugh. Irene apologizes through her laughter, saying Prince Caesar looks ridiculous. Irene reflects on the constant, cold stares and judgment she receives, especially from the Empress and Second Prince, who wish to consume her. Irene, surrounded by symbolic chains, feels like her situation is precarious, despite her forced laughter. Irene laughs brightly, a coping mechanism for her overwhelming despair. Prince Caesar looks at Irene, seemingly confused by her laughter. Irene, still laughing, points out that Prince Caesar is covered in soot and needs to be cleaned. Irene gently reaches out and wipes something from Prince Caesar's face. Irene and Prince Caesar look at each other, creating an intimate moment between them. Irene informs Mercedes that Prince Caesar needs a bath. Irene explains that Prince Caesar is absolutely covered in dust, necessitating a bath. Mercedes hesitates and looks troubled. Irene questions if there is a problem. Mercedes forces a smile and agrees to prepare the bath. Prince Caesar's male attendant asks if they should proceed with the bath. Irene, with a bright smile, looks forward to the bath preparations. Irene shrugs off Mercedes' hesitation, believing a simple bath couldn't cause any serious issues. Irene decides to simply observe the situation. Irene looks surprised as a bright flash of light emanates from the room. Irene flinches back in alarm as a loud bang is heard from the door, her face flushed. Prince Caesar, soaking wet and nearly naked, bursts from the doorway with a transformed reptilian arm, looking enraged. Prince Caesar's close-up shows his wet hair and face, his eyes filled with intense emotion. Irene cries out in alarm as Prince Caesar pulls her into a tight, wet embrace. Irene is shocked and questions Prince Caesar, who holds her close. Prince Caesar looks distressed, calling out Irene's name. A close-up reveals Prince Caesar's wet, muscular chest. Prince Caesar's attendant is seen holding him back, while Irene appears shocked by the unexpected intervention. Irene, holding a towel, looks bewildered and questions why Prince Caesar hasn't been properly washed. The attendant explains that Prince Caesar reacts violently to water, making bathing him very difficult. Irene sits thoughtfully on the floor, listening to the attendant explain Prince Caesar's difficulty with baths. Irene bravely declares she will be the one to try and bathe Prince Caesar. Mercedes looks shocked and tries to dissuade Irene, reminding her she has no experience with such personal tasks. Irene asserts that mutual support is part of marriage, and she is determined to try. An overhead shot shows the bathing room set up, with Irene on the floor and Prince Caesar sitting, surrounded by staff. Prince Caesar looks annoyed and disheveled in his white robe, awaiting the bath. Irene, now in a practical dress, rolls up her sleeves, ready to face the challenge. An attendant prepares to pour water, while Prince Caesar, dressed in a white robe, reacts with a subtle flinch and a look of displeasure. A sharp, clawed, reptilian arm tears through a red and black background as a forceful "No!" is exclaimed. The attendant screams in pain as water splashes and blood splatters onto his chest from an unseen impact. The injured attendant clutches his bleeding chest as Prince Caesar, looking distressed, stands behind him. A large, dark reptilian hand menacingly appears over Irene, who looks up in terror. Irene orders everyone to back away, observing the injured attendant collapsing while Prince Caesar looms, menacingly transformed. The attendant grimaces in pain and curses as he falls to the ground, his chest covered in blood. From an overhead perspective, Irene, Prince Caesar in his robe, and Mercedes are in the steamy bathing room, with a loud crash indicating a disruption. Irene looks exhausted, rubbing her temple, as Mercedes asks if she is all right, acknowledging the difficult situation. Irene's face shows a mixture of realization and slight bewilderment as she processes the events. Mercedes explains to Irene that bathing Prince Caesar is impossible because of how much he despises it. Mercedes suggests escorting Prince Caesar back to the playroom, expressing concern that he might catch a cold. Irene, deep in thought, questions whether the outburst was solely due to his hatred of bathing and tells Mercedes to wait. Irene admits to underestimating the situation, but declares her resolve to continue and finish the bath. Mercedes expresses her doubt, pointing out Prince Caesar's clear reluctance, but Irene firmly insists the bath still needs to happen. The bathing room is seen from above, with Irene near the tub and Prince Caesar standing with an attendant. Irene calls Prince Caesar to come closer. He stands bare-chested in his robe, looking directly at her. Mercedes reaches out in alarm, asking Irene what she intends to do. Irene explains to Mercedes that she made a promise to the Empress to make Prince Caesar human, as Prince Caesar stands silently beside her. Mercedes reacts with a shocked expression, questioning the meaning of "make him human." Irene urgently appeals to Mercedes for understanding, emphasizing that Prince Caesar needs this right now. Mercedes, after a moment of hesitation, reluctantly agrees to Irene's request. Mercedes stumbles backward as she leaves, telling Irene she will leave the rest to her, and Irene calls out her name. Irene reflects that Mercedes' overprotective nature is understandable, given she has raised Prince Caesar alone for over 10 years, especially after seeing the attendant's treatment. Irene thinks about Mercedes being her only helper and hopes she didn't upset her, then determines that they must begin. Prince Caesar looks at Irene, still in his robe with his reptilian arm, as Irene internally decides this is where they start. Irene gently asks Prince Caesar why he hates bathing, sitting close to him. Prince Caesar reacts with a furious, multi-expression panel, shouting emphatically that he hates it. Irene ponders that there must be a reason for his intense aversion to bathing, wondering what specific aspect he dislikes, while offering a small smile. In a chibi panel, Prince Caesar sits angrily, confirming Irene's internal thought about how much he really hates it. Irene demonstrates by placing her hand in the water, explaining how warm water relaxes the body and feels good. Prince Caesar makes a soft sound, looking at the water, and Irene notes that he doesn't seem completely disinterested. Irene is taken aback by a sudden realization, an exclamation mark appearing beside her face. Irene questions if Prince Caesar hates being bathed by servants, as chains are symbolically depicted behind him. Irene realizes that those who roughly bathed Prince Caesar were likely his abusers, then tells him that if he doesn't want others to bathe him, he must learn to do it himself. Irene offers to show him how, asking if he can try, and reassures him she will help this time, to which he quietly agrees. Prince Caesar flinches and winces as Irene gently pours water over his hand. Prince Caesar lets out a pained grunt, his eyes showing distress and a tear forming. Irene reacts with surprise, as Prince Caesar's reptilian hand is prominent in the foreground. Irene internally questions why Prince Caesar didn't react to the servant's blood earlier, wondering if her initial assumption about his reaction to blood was incorrect. Irene observes Prince Caesar looking down at his reptilian hand, pondering if her theory about his reaction to blood was wrong. Irene decides to pour water from a slightly higher position this time, as water splashes from a wooden bucket. Irene asks Prince Caesar how he feels, suggesting it's not so bad, as he looks away, his hair damp. Prince Caesar stands, his hair wet and dripping, while Irene observes him, a small smile on her face indicating progress. Irene's expression shifts to one of deep surprise and realization. Irene blushes furiously, suddenly realizing the implication that if he bathes himself, she would have to show her own bare skin. Prince Caesar looks at the flustered Irene and questions her reaction. Prince Caesar calls Irene's name Ren as he steps closer, showing his wet, muscular upper body. Irene, flustered and blushing, frantically tells Prince Caesar he cannot just toss his clothes, struggling with his wet robe. Prince Caesar looks at Irene with a confused expression, repeating, "Can't?" seemingly bewildered by her reaction. Irene, visibly flustered and blushing, emphatically tells Prince Caesar to hold tightly to his clothes so they don't come undone. Prince Caesar, looking resolute, clutches his wet robe with his reptilian hand and quietly agrees to Irene's instructions. Irene, still blushing, internally acknowledges that even with one problem solved, she must still demonstrate how to bathe him. Irene recalls a past meal where Prince Caesar wouldn't eat until she took the first bite, highlighting his tendency to follow her example. Irene gulps, still blushing deeply as she processes the implications of her task. Irene rustles her clothes, her determined expression still tinged with fluster as she prepares herself to continue.